The surgery goes on like this. These are his parameters. Here he is lying under the drapes, but yet very comfortable. And the surgeon is operating. You could see the nasal prongs on him, didn't you? Sandeep is here. Please don't worry, I haven't forgotten my topic. I'm going to talk to you on controversies and challenges in pediatric regional anesthesia. Yes, here are a lot of challenges and controversies that we face. I showed you the first case, not because probably I want to tell the audience here that I do pediatric regionals with equal zeal, but I want to tell you that regionals are so vociferous in adults. They make such a strong case. The entire surgery holds sway on a regional block. You yourself know you're doing the surgery under the regional block. The surgeon knows the regional block has entered the operability. The whole OT staff knows, and even the relatives know. Because you would have told the relatives that, look, this patient has a very, very high risk for general anesthesia. I'm going to give a block today, and if the block doesn't take up the way I want it to be, I probably might not do the surgery today, and let's meet sometime else. Perhaps tomorrow would be a better day for me. So there is no question here that regionals have given the operability in adults, period. Okay, this is our biggest challenge. Anyway, other than this challenge, there are various other challenges that we do face, and they are here. First is informed consent. Let's start from there itself. Then is the block performed under general anesthesia, which I just elaborated upon, but I'm going to show certain different aspects of it right now. Pediatric regional anesthesia and difficult airways. We have something to say here. Test doses, eternal controversy. Loss of resistance, how do we embark upon doing that? And compartment syndrome. And lastly, post-operative pain assessment, because this is where your regional blocks are going to be shown all alone. So let's see how we face them. This is a beautiful review that has come across, takes care of most of the things that I just showed, and few I have added on my own. So it's a proxy perceived care here, and then how much do you explain? Somebody else is taking decision for the baby. It's all fine as long as the baby is a baby. When they grow up to have their own mind, it's really difficult because the child might want something else and the mother might say something else. It starts even from mask induction or IV. The mother might say, no, don't give him all that gas, just give him an IV. The child might say, no, Dr. Auntie, I want a mask. And then comes to regionals. So it's all very difficult. And how much do you tell them? How much are you going to tell the mother that this is what the complications of your particular regional block here? So now here are the guidelines for it. No need for a full disclosure of all possible risks. The court says that it is shown in court something as a non-significant risk if the risk mentioned in your literature is 1 in 20,000 to 1 in 50,000. Allow me to give you an example here. Maybe if you have a child for hypospadias who's come for hypospadia surgery, of course, and you are going to go mask him and then give him a caudal, it is your right to tell the mother that, look, okay, I am going to stick a needle maybe at the level of the tailbone, and then I shall give a numbing medicine through it that would give numbing sensation around, or rather no sensation around the operation, during the operation, and even after the operation for a couple of hours. Then she is going to ask you, if she is smart enough, that what are the problems with it. You might say infection, inflammation, a bit of soreness at the most, and nothing else. You probably are now going to tell her that this can even lead to cardiac arrest. So, well, these are the guidelines that you might follow, but document this and write down the worst possible complications and let her read them. And then let her take an educated guess. And many a times, the mother or the father tells the child that we have come here to take a photograph. They will take you in the OT, click a photograph and send you back. So this is another challenge here. You need to keep on telling the child what exactly he is going to go through, because it is his body that is going to get cut. So very subtly we keep telling the child what's happening, because what you're going to face in the theater is only with the child and not with the parent. And neither the child will trust you and not the parent again if you let it go this way. Well, coming back to the dual modality, I have already shown you what happens to pediatric regional anesthesia when it comes to it. But it all started with this seed. There was a case report with severe complications of permanent paraplegia in a woman who received a central block performed under general anesthesia. Till then all was fine. Epidural puncture then, hence was said, should not be placed above the termination of the cord in unconscious and areflexic patient. Perfectly sensible. Risk of such a gravity is only justified as a life-saving measure under exceptional circumstances. Very, very true. The pediatric community got a little concern about it. What they said was, is self-report of early symptoms of toxicity likely to be any more reliable that comes through a frightened child? And how do you give a block in a wriggly baby? So luckily for us, 2 major studies ruled this out. But then I'll tell you the downside of it. 2-year-old child with left-sided pneumonia and pleural effusion, left-sided ICD in place, weight is 12 kilogram. Posted for a brachial artery exploration, injured during attempted vivisection on the left hand. His parameters are staring at you. If he was an adult, I would have simply given a brachial plexus block and probably, had a good cup of tea. But here, I will have to change his physiological milieu. I will have to at least mask him to give a block. So these are the upsides and the downsides. These are the challenges and the controversies of this given thing. But here is an exception to it. If you really handle the baby well and give probably a penile block with a very, very thin needle, or even a penile ring block with a very thin needle, and keep him extremely cozy and comfortable, let him suck on a sugar solution, not the one which is in our ORs because they are bitter. And this is how the surgery can go on. This block was given by my surgeon, by the way. Block performed under general anesthesia in pediatric patient is a standard norm. So let's go home with this idea. We'll come to difficult airways now. Well, suppose if we get patients of Pierre-Robin syndrome or any difficult airway for that matter, and if they come for a surgery like this, a hernia or foot or whatever, or intestinal explorations. So what take do we take? Leave the trouble alone till it troubles you, or what do? Circumvent the difficult airway with well-placed regional block, do we do that? Or take a complete control, which we are more used to. So what do we do with it? There are certain precise guidelines again for it, and that make again perfect sense. Let's see what they are. It depends upon the type of airway and it depends upon the type of surgery. If it is a type of airway, mask ventilation has to be possible, even to think of a regional. So you have to first confirm the mask ventilation with bit of a sedation. All emergency and difficult airway equipments should be kept ready. So if you're happy with the mask ventilation, yes, go ahead, give a block. But still, after mask ventilation, what type of surgery do you consider? It must be a surface surgery. The airway and head end must be accessible. Surgery can be stopped in between if any emergency case situation arises. So, and patient position, like the child should not be at the foot end of the table, draped under 1,000 drapes. So they should be quite close to you. And classical example maybe is a foot surgery or a hernia surgery, if you are very, very sure of your blocks. So take home message here is, difficult airway can be left alone and the surgery can be done under only regional anesthesia. First and foremost, that the anesthesiologist is not an occasional pediatric anesthesiologist. Mask ventilation is possible and the surgery has to be a surface surgery. So that is the time you say, you take the ACE out of regional. Otherwise, take complete control and then give a regional block. Now let's come to test dose. The entire aim behind the test dose is to prevent local anesthetic systemic toxicity, and let's see how do we do. Here, first of all, the drug that we used is our simple good old lignocaine with adrenaline, and which comes as a standard pre-prepared solution. So what all do we do to combat this situation? We all know we all aspirate, but it has a poor sensitivity in pediatric regionals. Spontaneous backflow of blood through the needle. If you see this, obviously you're not going to do anything. You need to replace the needle at that time. And cardiovascular signs secondary to small dose of adrenaline may not be very sensitive here because the child is under general anesthesia. So let's see what we say. Concomitant general anesthesia masks hemodynamic responses. And now let's see how do we read through the veil of general anesthesia whether the adrenaline has really gone into the blood. It's logical to believe that if you give adrenaline, the first response on the ECG machine is a tachycardia, but which is masked now because you probably might have given a good amount of general anesthesia. So first look at the T wave amplitudes, then the ST changes, and then the heart rate changes. The heart rate slowing or nodal rhythm is uncommon, but in fact is a perfect sign of it. And then there is a lag period of 60 to 90 seconds for these changes to actually manifest on ECG. So whenever you give your bolus, this is the time that you need to wait for. So hence our answer to this controversy is administer regional anesthesia maintaining spontaneous ventilation and then give muscle relaxant whenever possible. Cessation of spontaneous ventilation is a sign of inadvertent injection. Suppose if you're doing a thoracotomy, put a child on mask, let somebody hold the mask or you tie it, give lateral position, let the child be spontaneously breathing, put in your epidural catheter, turn him supine and then intubate him. While you're doing an epidural, if he suddenly stops ventilating himself, then there is something wrong. So at least that becomes an indication for you to be raising your own antennas. Okay. Give the total dose in Olicats of 0.1 to 0.2 milligram per kilogram and wait for 60 to 90 seconds in between the two fractionated dosages. This means that if you need to give 5 ml, you will probably take around 2 minutes, which is not that bad. Now coming to the other controversy of loss of resistance to detect epidural space. How many of people here use air? All right, and the rest? Saline? So, okay. No, there were 2 hands for saline, there were 2 hands for air. So what did the rest use? All right. This was MOR technique. Look at it. It has stood the test of time so well. It was first described in 1933 and we are in 2013. Wow. Let's see the advantages of air and, let's see where both stand. Advantages of air is it's radially available. It cannot be confused with any other substance and that's very important. Air may permit easier detection of a dural tap compared to saline, especially that you've got a loss of resistance and you remove the syringe filled with saline and the drops come out, and if they come out, you don't know whether the saline has come out or the CSF has come out. But a tuned person knows that this flow is going to stop, and it's going to be an 18 or a 19 gauge needle, so you know the flow is going to be big. Well, anyway, let's see the disadvantages. Numerous complications that include venous air embolisms, nerve root compressions, subcutaneous emphysemas, pneumocephalus, a great incidence of incomplete analgesia and a higher incidence of paresthesia. So we have some points towards and against either ways. Well, what I feel is, let us think in not loss of resistance now, but change of resistance. I'm sure you all will agree with me that when we passed through the ligamentum flavum, that we are just about to pass through it, we already know that we are in the ligamentum flavum. So let us tune our heads to the change in resistance, and whether it is air or saline, let whatever goes in, let it be as minimal as it could be. Coming to compartment syndrome. Yesterday I had touched a bit on it, but let's go in details right now and let's see what answers finally we get for this particular controversy, because it is a staring and blaring problem at us after giving a good, dense, nice block. What happens to compartment syndrome? Compartment syndrome is a real possibility. So do we give our continuous regional blocks, which we are so fond of, or we give it up? Let's see the signs and symptoms. Pain, pallor, paresthesia, paralysis, pulselessness. Yes, the first sign is pain. So those whosoever are asking us to hold our blocks are not wrong. They have a legitimate problem. What makes children inherently susceptible for compartment syndrome? Because they are in growing stage, their muscle growth is more, so the muscle volume is more, and which leads to increase in a baseline pressure. Normal compartment pressure in the leg of a child is 13 to 16 millimeters of mercury. In adult it is 0 to 10. So now let's see. Increased pressure in a closed muscle compartment. So how does it happen? It compromises the circulation and function of the tissue within the non-compliant muscle compartment, can ultimately lead to motor and sensory involvement, amputation and even death, period. So yes, it is a problem here. But what do we do with our regionals? Yes, go ahead with them. Let's see the answers given to it. First of all, adequate post-operative monitoring is required. Be perspicacious about the fact that this can happen, and be sure that you tell your whole team that this can happen. Use drugs in concentrations that cause only sensory block and not the motor one. So the separation should be good. These are the concentrations of the drug that are recommended. Measure the pressures wherever possible, but I know most of the times they don't do. And repeat assessment and suspicion. The example that I gave you yesterday, for those who weren't there at that time, first operative day, pain is well controlled. Second post-operative day, somebody calls you to look into the pain because the pain relief is not adequate. Number one, check your catheter. Number two, if you're convinced your catheter is well placed, please do not give a bolus at that time. Ask them to look into their plastifulness. So probably it's the first sign of compartment syndrome. Please don't keep stepping up your infusion rates if they have been giving you good results. Fine. Now let's come to post-operative pain management. Yes, it's indeed a challenge because you have placed a very well block, and then your baby probably is not yet looking happy to you. And it differs with all possible age groups. Now let's see how. I don't think I've ever completed my pediatric lecture without this poster boy, because he speaks volumes on what perioperative pain management in child is all about. Look at him. Look at the face. The brow is clenched. The face looks a typical face which is in pain. Now let's see, I thought whether it is hunger. So probably that's quietened down. But the regional anesthesiologist in me is worried about the block. Maybe this has comforted him very temporarily. Blocked feet, esophagals. Not blocked. Well, so in neonates it's totally different. It depends more on the parameters and of course the way they cry. Infants and toddlers, they may be happy, they may be happy in pain, they may not be happy in pain. So there are many reasons why they can cry. So you know what they are now after the video. Preschoolers and school-going children who are verbal, they may be in pain and yet not tell you that they are in pain. Because they're so scared of you. They probably might think that this girl is going to come and give me another prick. You never know. So they probably just don't tell you that they are in pain. So now you have to depend so much on your primary caretaker to tell you whether they are comfortable or they are not comfortable. Your challenge is even more increased if you do pediatric orthopedics, because of course there is where your blocks are required. Is my time up? Somebody is eagerly telling me, no, okay, fine, thank you. The Sandeep is not here, I hope. Okay, but half a minute more. In a mentally challenged baby, depend on the primary caretaker. She is your best guide to tell you whether the child is in pain. School-going children, they are smart enough, they will be very vocal and they will even tell you, look, your block is a dumb block, I have no pain relief. Adolescents, they have a brave front. No matter how they are, they will always put up a brave front and say, okay, I am just fine, but they may be still in pain. So just be very, very attentive to them and
I'm always so fond of this subject because I respect childhood a lot. Childhood is a world of miracles or of magic. It is as if creation rose luminously out of the night, all new and fresh and astonishing. Childhood is over the moment things are no longer astonishing, when the world gives you a feeling of déjà vu. When you are used to existence, you've become an adult. Thank you so much.